Hello, everybody, and welcome to Backfired, an NBA history podcast about bad teams, bad luck, and bad decisions. My name is Lewis, and today we're going to spend some time in the modern NBA. We're going to do a little mid-season check-in on the teams who aren't winning as many games as a lot of people thought that they would. These are just going to be my opinions on things and, a little bit of data thrown in there. I thankfully have gotten to watch a ton of basketball this year, thanks to the Grizzlies giving me League Pass for being a season ticket holder. Of course, my opinions are biased. I'm not going to claim to be unbiased, but I took the DraftKings win total over-under projections for each team, plugged in each team's current record, did a little calculation, not based on strength of schedule remaining or anything, but just wanted to see how many wins they're on pace for just by taking their current win percentage, prorating that to 82 games. So these are all going to be teams that are going to go under their DraftKings projected win total by around 5 games or more. There are a few that I'm going to leave out. I'm going to leave out the Lakers, going to leave out the Pistons and the Rockets, but there are 7 teams that I'm going to talk about. But before I get into that, I wanted to briefly talk about something that's not the current season, a coaching hire that didn't go as planned for the Orlando Magic in 2007. And that is when they hired Billy Donovan as their head coach from the University of Florida Gators. He now, of course, is the Chicago Bulls head coach, and he's coached the Oklahoma City Thunder as well. Billy Donovan was fresh off of back-to-back NCAA championships at the University of Florida, and those teams were absolutely loaded. They had Joakim Noah, Al Horford, Corey Brewer. The 2007 team had Maurice Spates. They had a guy named Taurean Green, who was a really good college player. He only played 17 games in the NBA, but they beat the Greg Oden and Mike Conley Ohio State Buckeyes team in the championship game in 2007, beat UCLA in 2006. They had 3 top 10 picks in the 2007 draft. So like I said, loaded. This was one of the great runs in college basketball history. And with the core of his championship team heading off to the NBA, most of them were juniors, their coach thought, why don't I join him? He was open about wanting to coach in the NBA someday and said, quote, "It's intriguing because it's all basketball. That's something that could be attractive for me." So he talked to the Memphis Grizzlies, but they backed out when he asked to be both the head coach and the president of basketball operations of the team. And he'd already turned down the University of Kentucky a few months earlier, which was a big deal because Donovan kind of got his coaching start at the University of Kentucky under Rick Pitino. Pitino had been Billy Donovan's coach when he was the backup point guard to Mark Jackson on the Knicks in 1988, and then he was the Marshall head coach and then Florida. But then after the Memphis Grizzlies said, no, you can't also be the president, because that typically doesn't work out if you're the president and the head coach, he figured, well, let me just stay in Gainesville. I've got this great recruiting class coming in. I've got Jay Lucas, Nick Calathis, Chandler Parsons. Parsons, of course, future episode topic material right there. But then in late May of 2007, the Orlando Magic, for the second time in 10 years, fired Brian Hill from their head coaching position. And they were looking to make a huge hire because they had made the playoffs for the first time in a few years that year in 2007, but were swept in the first round by the Detroit Pistons. Both years that Hill coached in his return, they'd had a losing record. Hill had been the head coach of the Orlando Magic team that went to the finals in 1995, but the first time that he was fired back in 97, the players unanimously voted in Penny Hardaway's hotel room to demand his firing. They didn't like the way that he coached. He had kind of worn out his welcome. The Magic, in 2007, they had their young all-star center Dwight Howard. They had Hedo Turkoglu. They had Jameer Nelson. They were just about to trade with the Seattle Supersonics to get Rashard Lewis. All they needed was a great coach to take their team to the next level. And the Magic said, Billy Donovan, you are our guy. So they reached out to his agent, and Donovan then had a choice. Is he going to sign this extension that the Florida Gators were going to offer him and try to win a third NCAA title? Or is he going to go coach Dwight Howard and try to win an NBA championship as well? Well, the day after his agent was contacted, the front page headline on the Orlando Sentinel read, "Abracadabra." And he was flying from Destin to Orlando to be the focal point of a press conference announcing him as the next head coach of the Orlando Magic. And he's expected to run a similar style of offense to the one that he was so successful with in Gainesville, which, he was going to force turnovers, they were going to run fast breaks, and they were going to shoot threes, both at a high clip and at a high percentage. So he signed his 5-year contract worth $5.5 million per year, but then all of a sudden, he had to go back to Gainesville, talk to his team, break the news to them, and he had what he described as a change of heart, and he asked to be released from his contract just a couple of days after signing it. And the Magic did allow him to be released from the contract if he would pay them an undisclosed sum of money and sign a non-compete clause that said that he wouldn't coach in the NBA for at least 5 years, which he gladly did to signal to his future recruits and the ones coming in that he was going to be in Gainesville for the long haul. So he signed an extension at the University of Florida, rebuffed another offer to leave Florida for Kentucky 2 years later. They, of course, hired John Calipari then, and he stayed in Gainesville until 2015 when he left to coach Kevin Durant and Russell Westbrook on the Oklahoma City Thunder. And that was a move that really would have worked out for him, probably made him the second coach in basketball history after Larry Brown to win an NBA title and an NCAA title, if not for Game 6 Klay Thompson happening. Now, for Orlando, this ended up working out just fine as they were able to trade for Stan Van Gundy, who had been fired from the Miami Heat but was still under contract with them. And Van Gundy led them to 4 consecutive 50-win seasons and the 2009 NBA Finals. But it is interesting to think about what could have happened if Billy Donovan had been coaching them instead. He's an all-right NBA coach now, but those Orlando Magic teams were way better than any team that he's had outside of the 1 year that he coached Kevin Durant. So, maybe he could have gotten it done in Orlando as well. Who's to say? But anyway, let's get into the midseason check-in. So the first 2 teams that I'm going to talk about are 2 teams who each made big trades this offseason that aren't panning out just yet, but they might if something changes in the second half of the season. So first, the Timberwolves and the Hawks. The Wolves, of course, traded everything that they had for Rudy Gobert. The fit between Rudy Gobert and Karl Anthony Towns has been less than stellar, I'll just say. Gobert also not quite as good as Build, averaging just 1.3 blocks per game. It's the first time that he's averaged under 2 blocks per game since his rookie season. And the Wolves are middle of the pack defensively, which you'd expect them to be very good defensively if they have Rudy Gobert. But they're having to rely on defensive contributions from other players like Jaden McDaniels, who's having a fantastic third season. But in the 400 minutes that Gobert and Towns have shared the floor, the Wolves have a minus 1.5 net rating per 100 possessions. Towns and Anthony Edwards are minus 3.4 together, and Edwards and Gobert are minus 1 together. So between those 3, something is just off. For this season in particular, their only hope really is that during Cat's absence with the calf strain that he sustained, the coaching staff have figured out, what's working and what hasn't, since they have roughly a 20-game sample size each of having Edwards and Gobert without Cat and Edwards and Gobert with Cat. They have roughly the same winning percentage with and without Cat. It's 48% with him, 50% without him. Once Cat returns, if they still can't make it work, step 1 is going to be they're going to fire Chris Finch because it's easier to fire the coach than to trade a bunch of players. That's always going to be the case. Step 2, if firing Finch doesn't work, is going to be granting the eventual Cat trade demand to recoup some of the draft capital that they traded away for Rudy Gobert, which I wanted to give a Timberwolves fan perspective on that. I, of course, am not a Wolves fan, but I've read a lot of their message boards and stuff this season. They do not care, by and large, about the draft picks that they gave up for Gobert. That's the overwhelming sentiment that I've seen. According to them, the Wolves, typically don't hit on draft picks, so why does it matter if they have them or not? I can't say that I agree with that because the new GM, Tim Connolly, isn't the guy who made those bad draft choices in the past, but I'm all for taking a different route if building through the draft hasn't worked out for them so far. Gobert may not have been the right choice for what to throw those draft picks out, but it certainly was worth taking a swing on somebody. I don't think that the Wolves needed to sign Tim Connolly to a $40 million contract just to get fucked over in a trade with Danny Ainge. Anybody could have done the same thing for a much lower dollar amount, but that is the choice that they made, and they're going to have to live with it for the near future. Now on to the Atlanta Hawks. Of course, they traded for DeJounte Murray. They gave up fewer draft picks, but in total, they gave up 4 if the Spurs are able to exercise the pick swap granted to them in 2026. Overall, the Murray trade's been a pretty good decision for them. What has been a bad decision for them is parting with Kevin Huerter, who is shooting almost 42% from three on very high volume for the Sacramento Kings this year. They are going to regret that one for a very long time, I would say. And the Hawks are struggling a little bit on the whole, but I actually think they're probably going to get out of it this year, unlike the Wolves. Now, I don't know what's going to happen in future seasons because their management situation is insane, but here is why I think the Hawks are going to be fine this year. First, they are going to fire Nate McMillan soon. The writing is on the wall. The fans hate him. He's gotten in screaming matches with Trae Young, and the moment that Trae asks for him to be gone, he will be gone. They are not going to want to trade Trae Young until they absolutely have to. But on the other hand, Trae Young has been shooting very poorly this year, but I feel like that's going to turn around. On the whole, he is shooting 33% from three on the season, but since New Year's, small sample size of course, but in the new year, he's shooting about 43% from three. So all he needs to do is continue this hot streak, or at least normalize somewhere between the 30% and the 43%, and everything's going to look normal again. Trae is more about volume than efficiency. Last year was his first really, really efficient three-point shooting season, but he's going to be fine. He's good. The ceiling of this team, though, I feel is not extremely high. Last year, they won 43 games, had to win 2 play-in games to make the playoffs, where they were completely embarrassed by the Miami Heat. But they have won 3 in a row. They can ride a Trae hot streak into the mid-40s of wins, which I feel sure that they're going to do. The Phoenix Suns are currently on pace for 38 wins, but their projection was around 52.5. The main reason for this is injury to Devin Booker, to Chris Paul, to Cam Johnson. Johnson is actually going to be playing on the day that this episode comes out, which is great. He had a torn meniscus, but is going to be back soon. They've been missing Chris Paul in 2 different stints. The first one was not much of an issue because Devin Booker was playing. They went 9-5 in a 14-game stretch without Paul, but with Booker. During that stretch, Booker was averaging 29 points on very efficient shooting. But the Suns started 15-6 and are 6-18 since. They've been having to rely on DeAndre Ayton, who's been good but not great this year. He's been kind of checked out. They've had to rely on Mikal Bridges, who's been really good, but, Mikal Bridges alone isn't enough to win you games. They've been having to rely on role players and bench guys. Damian Lee, who dropped 30 points in a loss to the Timberwolves the other day. Saban Lee, who's on a 10-day contract. Josh Okogie. They are currently starting Dario Saric and Dwayne Washington Jr., who was a rookie on a 2-way contract in Indiana last year. So, not surprisingly, it has not gone well. But once they get Devin Booker back from his injury, they're going to be fine. The Charlotte Hornets are currently on pace for 20 wins after being projected to win around 33.5. They weren't projected to be great, but they are in the Wemby sweepstakes, let's say. The injury to LaMelo Ball has really hampered them. He had an ankle injury that kept him out of parts of preseason, and then the first 13 games of the regular season. They started the season 3-10 without him. And he came back, he played in 3 games, but then in the third, which was a home game against the Indiana Pacers, he stepped on a fan's foot and missed another 11 games where they went 3-8 in that stretch. So they're 6-18 without him, but then with him, they're only 5-16. So whether he plays or not, they're not a good team. They're poorly coached. Michael Jordan rehired Steve Clifford as the head coach after firing him in 2018, so I'm not sure what they expected there. Gordon Hayward has missed a lot of time. They're worse on offense than they are on defense, where they are not very good. They have Kelly Oubre and Terry Rozier chucking shots left and right. Mason Plumlee is actually doing pretty well. And of course, I love their backup center, Nick Richards, who I dubbed the putback king of Charlotte in an article that I wrote a few weeks ago. He's an outstanding offensive rebounder and putback guy, but good center play in LaMelo Ball so far alone has not proven to be a recipe for success in Charlotte just yet. The LA Clippers, they are right at 500, so projected at 41 wins right now, but they were pegged at 52.5 before the season. Paul George has missed some time. Kawhi Leonard, of course, has missed half of their games and is still kind of knocking off the rust from his ACL recovery. He's not the same player defensively as he once was, but Kawhi has really turned it on offensively as of late. In the last 5 games, he's averaging 28.5 points on 50% shooting, 44% from 3, but the Clippers are still only 2-3 in those games. They started off the season as a very, very poor offensive team and a really good defensive team. For the beginning part of the season, everything except for the past month, they were scoring 108.1 points per 100 possessions, which is 29th in the league. And they were giving up 108.9 points, which was third in the league. So a minus 0.8 net rating. But then in the last month, that net rating is about the same. It's minus 0.7 now. But they are scoring and giving up 6 more points per 100 possessions. So they are now 20th in offense, up from 29th, and 16th in defense, down from 3rd in the past month. So no surprise that as things stand, they're going to finish right around 500. That's what the net rating of between plus and minus 1 kind of suggests. If healthy, I think they'll be able to finish above 500. They are 9-7 in the 16 games that Kawhi and Paul George have played in together. Lineups that contain both Kawhi and Paul George are almost a +7 per 100 possessions, so you'd have to assume if their two best players are both playing that they're going to be better, but as we all know, that is unlikely to happen. The Golden State Warriors, they are also 500, so also currently on pace for 41 wins. Their real issue is that they cannot win on the road. They're 5-17 on the road so far. They started off this season 3-7. They've only been as many as 2 games over 500 in the entire season. Steph Curry has missed some time, but they are only 6-8 without him. That's not as bad as I would have thought that they were going to be in that stretch that he was out. That includes a 5-game winning streak starting on Christmas Day without him, although 4 of the 5 games in that win streak were against okay to bad teams, but they did have a good win over the Memphis Grizzlies on Christmas. Klay Thompson is doing really well. Andrew Wiggins has missed about a month of the season. Jordan Poole has been, relative to last season, pretty hit or miss. So, there's a lot of things working for and against them that I think will most likely work themselves out throughout the year. I don't think they're going to miss the playoffs, but I would not peg this as a championship contender as it stands. Okay, and then the last one that I'm going to talk about are the Toronto Raptors. They are 20-25 on pace for 36 wins instead of the 45.5 that they were projected at. Despite Pascal Siakam having an excellent year, you have Fred VanVleet, who wants out, he can't shoot, and who has back problems right now. You've got Scotty Barnes, who isn't playing as well as he did last year. On paper, outside of slightly lower shooting percentages, he's doing about the same or better in most box score stats, but on the court, it's really just not working out for him as well as it did last year, is kind of the best way I can say it. He's not putting in as much effort. He's been benched a few times. Something just is not clicking for him the way that it did last year when he was Rookie of the Year and a really integral part of a 48-win team. And then there's a couple of issues that are rearing their heads right now. Poor roster construction and poor draft decisions outside of Scotty Barnes. They have no true center. Pascal Siakam is their de facto center a lot of the time. The pick that they traded to the Spurs at the trade deadline to get off of Goran Dragic and to get Thad Young in return was number 20. They could have used that on Walker Kessler, who went 22nd. Kessler is a great young defensive center. The pick that they spent on Malachi Flynn in the 2020 draft, which was the 29th pick, that could have been used for Desmond Bane, who went 30th. Of course, hindsight is 2020, but even if just one of those picks had gone differently, you might see a different result on the court right now. The result of all that is that the Raptors are looking like sellers at the trade deadline next month. And they've got good pieces like OG Anunoby and Gary Trent Jr. who are likely going to be available. All right, so that is going to be it for me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. Be sure to follow me on social media at Backfired NBA Pod on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. I just hit 10,000 followers and joined the Creator Fund on TikTok, so that's been exciting. I've earned $8 so far. So I am putting in my 2 weeks notice at work, and there will be daily episodes of this from now on. Just kidding. But I have built up a few episodes that I think are really interesting and I think you'll really like. So hopefully you'll join me on those, and we will talk again in 2 weeks. All right. Have a good one.
Baby, are you gonna be the one that saves me? And after all, you're my wonder wall.